Hi, so today I thought I'd show you how we can make a fun little Christmas ornament, or it could be a gift tag, or it could be anything you like really, using up some 2.5-inch squares just for a change. So it is a little bit Christmassy because I've used Christmas fabrics. If you were making just a regular gift tag, it doesn't have to be Christmas fabrics, of course. So for this we need to have some leftover 2.5-inch squares of whatever fabrics it is that you choose. I would suggest that you might want to have 3 of one colour and 1 or 2 of another colour, or something like that. Anyway, we'll go through it all so you can see what I'm doing. You need a bit of cord or narrow ribbon to hang from, and up here you can see I've made 3. I've got 2 going the same way up as this one is, and 1 going across, and that I did that for a reason which I'll talk about. And this one I've sewn a little bell onto the end, so these are great for embellishing. If you've got little beads and bells and things like that, this would be a way of using some of those as well. So initially I think it is good to use up some of our leftovers. So we've got 2.5-inch squares, and I happen to have got a nice sort of Christmassy ones. We often end up with offcuts of batting from down the side of quilts or whatever it's from, so we can use up some of that. Not too thick, you don't want a great thick batting there, but something, this is a cotton poly 80-20 blend, which I find I use a lot of, and it works really well for all sorts of big projects and small projects. So what I'm going to do, and we'll need an iron and a little bit of fusible web as well, and I'm suggesting the use of an applique mat. Again, not essential but always handy. So what I'm doing, you can work on more than one at a time. I've got 4 here on my piece of batting. You might have a bigger piece of batting or whatever you're comfortable with, or you may only want to do 1. If you only want to work on 1, I suggest that your batting be slightly larger than your 2.5-inch square, just so that you've got a little bit of room to move with things. So what you need to decide if you're going to make one of these is what sort of colours you'd like. So the one that's in the middle there is the colour that we're going to place down first onto our batting. So when I do this one, it's going to have a red centre in there rather than the red sides as I've got here. So any of these that I've put down, the colour that you lay down, again with the cotton type batting, it just sits there quite nicely. You don't need to fuse it or anything, it'll be fine. So, and then you need 2 more squares to go on the sides, and then a 3rd square to go on the back, which I'm recommending be the same or similar to the 2 that you're using on the sides there. That's mostly so that when it's on the seam there, if it's wildly different, it may show where you don't want it to. It's not for any other particular reason. So if I go ahead and I might work on this little green one. We've got a nice little green square. It's just sitting on the batting. It's got little stars on it. And I've just got some squares here. I had some nice stripy fabric, and I thought, well, they might be quite nice to use on the sides. So we just need to fold those, so they're all 2.5-inch squares. I'm not changing any sizes of anything. So we just need to fold those and press those in half. We want a half on the diagonal, nicely pressed, so that it stays nicely pressed. And then we want to be able to put those on top. Now I've got a piece here that's showing you the next stage, but I'll go through it and do it with you. We're going to fold back those diagonal edges. When we folded a square in half, if it's been cut on the straight grain, which you know because it is not particularly stretchy on the straight, on the diagonal, on the bias, it's quite stretchy. So because we've folded on the bias, we can stretch that edge. So when we can flip that back and it'll stretch and curve around. I have done a video before using this method in a quilt, but we're just making a little thing this time. So if I was going to do that, I would grab my 2 squares, but I'm going to press that little fold back in first. You don't have to, you can turn it back as you sew, but I know for some of us that's a little bit daunting, so I thought I'd show you how you could press it in first. So I've got my square folded here, and because I'm using one of these nice wool felt ironing mats, it's great for this purpose because you can pin straight into it. So I'm just going to pin that. So you don't want to stretch that out at all, because this is remember, this is a stretchy edge here now. So make sure this stays a nice right angle. Pop your pin in there. So not quite 1/4 inch in, but somewhere close to. And then we're just going to flip that little stretchy edge back, and we're going to press that down. and it may not stay there, but it will hold there enough when you're sewing that you're not trying to manage to do that bit as well. So we need to do both the triangles like that. So again, pop your pins in each side, keeping this nice and square so it's not stretching, and then just roll back that stretchy edge there and just press that so that it'll help with the stitching. Right, so we've got that far, we're doing well. So now we're going to be working on this little one here. So what we need to do next is we need to position those. So we're just going to lay them over the top of the square so that the corners all match. That one on one half and this one on the other half. And I'm suggesting, again, you don't have to do this, but if you'd like to pin it in place, because everything's quite small, movement can make quite a difference. If it moves too much when it's this small, it's kind of a higher percentage of movement. So I'm just pinning that just along that edge, just gently there. And if you pin the other one on the other corner as well, so this should be going through the corner there, that little fold. And then we want to pin the other one on. These little pins that I'm using, by the way, they're called magic pins. They're great because they've just got a low height knob on them. They're quite long and they're designed for being able to sew over them and all sorts of things, just so you know. So I'm going to position the other one there, and so that where that pin comes out that way, I think if you pin that one in that way, that works quite nicely. So they're pretty much at right angles to each other. A bit confusing with the other one pinned, but I've left it pinned there for a reason. So this one we want to pin into this way so that they cross over. So I think you can see what I've done there. The pins are going in the two different directions. This bit's opening up and the two different directions there. Now because I'm doing more than one at a time, I can now, I've got those two pinned, I can actually just keep sewing onto the next one if I wanted to do that, or you can just do them individually. I'm actually going to be sewing it individually, but I wanted to just show you that you can prepare a few ahead and you can just keep on going if that's how you'd like to do it. So now that it's done to that point, we need to stitch these down. So we're going to stitch through the batting as well. So we've got the batting on the back, and I'm just going to go to the sewing machine. So we're going to start sewing up in the corner here, and the idea is to come along and stitch along the outside of that curved edge. So not the fold in there, but the one that we've ironed over to. So hopefully you'll be able to see that as I'm stitching. And I need to have my foot ready for that. So I'm just using a regular straight stitch, nothing tricky about this. So I'm going to start it in the corner, and I'm coming along so that I get onto that first curve, the one on my left, and I'm just going to make sure that I can go follow along that. So I'm just going to turn that around because I just want to stitch along that curve, close as you can get to the edge of that curve where it arrives on the other bit. So all the way along, back to the corner again, and you can just pivot your needle there and come back down the other side. Now you might want to consider using, if you've got some nice decorative threads, this would be a good time to use them if you're using these sort of metallic type fabrics, or you'd like another colour, or you'd like to do something more decorative. This would be a good chance to have a little play. So I'm just going to work on the one, otherwise we'd be here all day. It'd be nice, I'd get all my little ornaments done. So you can see there that I've got that, so there's still a little bit of an opening there that is still sitting proud, but that's okay. That's kind of nice as if you're looking into a little window. But now we just want to trim that off. So I'm just going to roughly cut that batting because I'm not doing the other ones just now. And I'm actually going to trim that down to match the 2.5 inch square. So we'll put those to one side. So we've got that. We've just got our little sewing line on the back there. And I'm just going to trim these back to the 2.5 inch square size that we had to start with. but it's much easier to have done this part of the stitching on a slightly larger piece of batting, so there's something to handle, because this is getting quite small. So now I've got it nicely trimmed up. We're just about ready to put it all together now. So I'm suggesting that you have a piece of, I'm using some gold cord. You might have a fine ribbon or cord, something like that. So I've cut a piece that's approximately 12 inches long, and I've just tied a knot in it. So nothing fancy, we're not seeing the knot. So you just really want those ends held together. A knot's quite a good thing, just in case it wants to pull through later on. So just a knot like that. And we're going to lay that now. I'll talk about the direction at the moment. So the one that I've got up here that's going across, I thought if you were wanting to do it as a name tag or something like that for somebody, you could actually write in that space. So that's why I've turned it round. My personal preference for a little hanging ornament is that it's going up and down. However, everyone has a different purpose for what they're making. So if we're going to make it so that the little shape goes up and down, we need our backing square now. Now it can be the same fabric, it can be a different fabric. I'm going to use a green one on the back. So what we need to do to be able to turn this, because I didn't necessarily want us to have to stitch it closed, because we're working with a few layers of fabric, it can be quite fiddly to get that to turn to hand stitch it. So I'm suggesting that we cut a little slit in the back piece. Now you can do this with a pair of scissors, or you can do this just with your rotary cutter. It's not important, it's going to be covered up later on. So now I've just got a slit in the back there. So I want to lay this piece of cord over that corner so that the knot is sticking out. We don't need the knot right in or anything, it can stick out a little bit. And I'm going to pop the other end of my cord or ribbon through that slit, just to keep it out of the way, because we don't want to stitch it as we're going around. So what we're going to do now is place that cord there so that the knot's just a little bit out of the way there, so that we can start sewing. And we're just going to sew it, basically bagging it out, if you understand that term. We're going to sew it right sides together all the way around, and because we've got a hole, we've got something to turn it through. And because that cord is coming through that hole, we know where it is. So I'm going to go to the sewing machine now, and I'm just going to stitch all the way around, and maybe just a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch. We don't need a full 1/4 of an inch seam here. Make sure that you're catching everything in, so more than 1/8 of an inch, but I'm suggesting less than 1/4. So just pivot at the corners. Make sure that your ribbon piece, cord piece stays out of your way. I pressed the wrong button, I'm just pivoting. And back along the last side. So nothing terribly hard at this stage. So we've come all the way along. Now I'd suggest that you might want to just trim off those little corners with a little pair of scissors. It's not essential, but it does help the corner sit a little bit better when we turn it out the right way. So just get rid of that. And then we're going to pull that through. So because we've got that cord all the way ready through that hole, we can start turning that, and that'll pull your top point up quite nicely for you. Because it's quite bulky on a small scale, the corners won't pop out to be absolutely exact points, but that's where, if you're worried about your corners, a little bit of embellishment can help with things like that. You might like to have something not too sharp, like a pair of scissors. Just to poke those corners out a little bit so that they're reasonably square. The top one should pull out fairly well because of the cord in there. And do the others. So quick and easy. If you're making several of these, it's probably quicker to be making them all at once. Great on if you've got a group activity and you want some little tags on things, or if you want to name things. So that's pretty much it done, but we're going to press that now because we want that to sit as flat as we can. So we've got that slit there that we've turned it through. Don't worry about that, we're going to cover that up any minute now. So just give it a good press. Flip it over and press it. And so that's really good at that stage, and now we're going to cover that up. Now I'm suggesting that we simply cover it up with a square of a similar fabric, and I had one ready here, and I've put a square of fusible web on it. We do need to trim it down, or you might want to do one that's got a piece of white fabric on it, because you might want to write on the back if you were using it as a gift tag. And I think this one here, I have done that. So I've popped a little piece of white on the back of that, and I've just used the Pigma pen. So you can write on the fabric with these micron Pigma pens, because they're permanent on fabric. And always test out your pen on another piece of fabric first to make sure it's not going to run into the fabric, but usually they're pretty good on the fabrics. So you can write on the back if you wanted to use it as a tag. You could write in that space, as I've got this one here white, you could write something in there if that was something that you wanted to do, or you could do none of those and just put a square of some other fabric. So on the back, remember we started with 2.5 inch squares. We're going to trim one with a fusible web on it down to 1 3/4 inches, because it needs to be less than what we've got currently. So it's already pulled in with the seam allowance, so we'll just trim that down to 1 3/4 square. I use my board a lot for my measurements, it helps me line things up. So that's a 1 3/4 inch square with fusible web on the back now. And I'm just going to peel the paper off, and I'm going to fuse that on the back. So that's covering. So the other thing is, if you are going to embellish, put beads or bells or something on those corners, I suggest you do it at this stage before you cover the hole up, because then you can get your needle and thread inside there and everything gets covered up as far as ends of thread and knots and things like that. So embellish before you put this last piece on, whether it be the name or whether it's just a piece of fabric. And then so position that, center that onto the back. It's going to be slightly smaller than your ornament, and then we're just going to iron that in place. And because we're not washing and wearing all this sort of thing, the fusible webs will stay permanent, certainly enough for something that's just a hanging ornament or tag. And I think that looks really cute. We've got that on there, that looks quite nice on the back. That one's got a different one on the back. You could do it the same on the back if you wanted to. Let's grab these down. This one's got the stripe on the back, because if you were using them as a little ornament, they might swing around a little bit. It's kind of nice to see something on the back. This one I've used a matching fabric on the back, and I think all of those are acceptable, whether it be a gift tag, whether it be just a little ornament, just a little tag to hang off a gift, even without a name on it, so that somebody can use it then to hang or re-gift. That's what a lot of people like to do. So that's it for a little Christmas ornament. Embellish to your heart's content if that's what you like to do, or just use up some of those leftover 2.5 inch squares. Thank you.